Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Here we are.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sophia Jackson, Events Manager at the Society of Authors. Thank you for joining today's session, The Reluctant Networker, Online Networking in the Literary World with Ronke Lawal. Today's webinar is part of the SOA at Home Festival, which is now in its final fortnight and finishes next Thursday, the 9th of July. All sessions are free, but if you can afford to donate £1 to the Authors Emergency Fund to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis, please visit our GoFundMe page via the link in the chat on the right-hand side. This session is 1 hour. If you have any questions or comments, we would love to see those in the chat, and we plan to get to those in the last 15 to 20 minutes of the session. If you have any connection issues, please press the reconnect button at the center of the screen. Today's format is a quick intro from me, then Ronke will go straight into her presentation. Here's a bit of background on Ronke. Ronke Lawal, founder of Ariatu PR, is dedicated to seeing people thrive and succeed. Using over a decade of business experience, she gives individuals, creatives and business owners strategic ways to use PR in their own professional, personal or business lives. I will now hand you over to Ronke.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Hi, welcome to the session. So we're going to cover quite a lot, hopefully, in this over the next 45 minutes. I'd love for it to be as interactive as possible, but obviously we don't have the time to have a conversation. But please do share questions and comments as each slide goes through, and at the end we can engage with those questions. So the first slide is just literally all the things I'm going to cover today. We're going to talk about confidence building. I want to focus on how you as authors and in the literary space tell your stories, how you build relationships with yourselves and other key stakeholders in your network, how you can build your personal brand and how you shouldn't be fearful of building your personal brand, and how you can be effective at utilizing social media for networking. And that's another thing that I know people are quite afraid of is social media, especially in this digital age. We'll cover some of the tips and advice that I give in the ways that you can use social media to benefit yourselves and whichever goals and however way you want to use social media. So the first thing I wanted us to focus on today is confidence building. One of the questions I'd like to ask is, how confident are you really? We're often confident in our immediate networks, in our immediate social spaces, and our immediate personal spaces. But when it comes to selling ourselves or selling a product, and in this instance, selling a book or a story to others, other audiences, we're not always confident. And these are some of the questions that I like to outline in terms of how you can build your confidence and in order to navigate spaces and network effectively. So the first one is knowing yourself. Who are you really? So I'd like you to take some time, obviously not necessarily right this minute, but after this session, to just do a brain dump, a roadmap in terms of who you really are. What are your core values? What's your worth? What is your value as an author in this space? As you're writing your books and putting out your work and, hopefully navigating the literary space, understanding your value in this space is going to really ensure that you network effectively. Do you know your industry? What do you want to be known for within your industry? One of the things I like to focus on here is really harnessing and understanding your uniqueness. It's not necessarily about being like everybody else or being like anyone else. There is something about you, there's something about your gift, your talent in this space that makes you stand out. So make sure that not only do you know yourself, but you know your industry and know the value that you bring to it. What do you want to be known for within your industry? And stand by that. And I forgot my question mark. So for any of you literary people, you're going to see my little typo. So excuse my typo there. How do you deal with failure? Now, one of the things when we look at confidence is it's not necessarily that you don't have enough self-belief. I think a lot of us believe in our talent, especially as writers, I'm sure, as authors out there, you believe in your talent. You may already have written books and had them published and sold quite a few. But how do you deal with instances of failure? And now I'm not going to define what failure looks like to you. I think failure looks like different things to different people. But how do you deal with failure in your your own life, first of all, and then in the wider world, in the wider literary space. What are your coping mechanisms? If you deal with failure in the right way, in a way that enables you to heal and move through it, whatever that failure might be, it enables you to navigate spaces confidently. But what we often do is we keep the pain or the scars of failure with us, carry those scars with us, carry those scars around with us, and that knocks our confidence over and over again. And often it's past failures. It's those past kind of lessons that we've learned and we need to unlearn. I mean, the lesson we can learn lessons from our failures, but those negative lessons, those negative stories that we tell ourselves that make us feel like we're not worthy. And that negatively has an impact on us when we enter into new environments and new spaces, especially when it comes to promoting ourselves and self-promotion and personal branding, which I'll talk about later. Be brave. Now, just to tell someone to be brave is never going to be enough, right? It's easier said than done. I could tell you to get on the stage and do a TED Talk tomorrow. You could get an invitation to do a TED Talk tomorrow about your book, about your work, about the inspiration behind your work. And I can just say, be brave and do it. It's not enough. You have to do the work I've just outlined now and get some other work done as well. So whether that's coaching, whether that's therapy, whether that's developing a unit of an established network, a unit of contacts with the other members in the society who can help you, to encourage you and to undertake positive reinforcement. They'll allow you to be brave. Or let me use another word, not to allow you. You don't need permission to be brave. You have to allow yourself to be brave, right? Do something that makes you uncomfortable. Now, when I say do something that makes you uncomfortable, I don't necessarily mean run through the streets of wherever you're living naked. That's also against the law. What I actually mean is do something that right now you're thinking, I don't want to do because X, Y, Z, because it's not for me. I don't understand it. Do something that actually, once you get into the habit of doing it, will shine a spotlight on your talent and your gift. So I'm going to use examples later on in this presentation. But one of the most popular things that people find uncomfortable, especially when it comes to confidence building, especially in our current era, is the digital space and sharing their work online and networking with others online. And that's basically fundamentally the theme of today's session. So hopefully you've got that, confidence building. A few more tips when it comes to being brave and just working on your confidence is keeping a record of your achievements, no matter how small they are. I don't want to necessarily place a limitation on how you define success, but keep a record of your achievements. If, for example, by the end of this session, when you started this session, you just did not want to use social media. You hate social media. You don't want to tweet about your book. You don't want to post a piece of video content about your book. You don't want to send a press release about, or not just send a press release, even write a press release yourself. Some of you may not have a budget for a publicist, for example. There's a lot of little things that you might not want to do at the start of this conversation we're having today. By the end of this session, what I want you to do is choose one thing, one goal that you'll do, and keep a record of that when you've done it. Even if it's just sending a tweet, that to me is an achievement for some people, because some people are very scared of social media. So just these little things that you're doing along the way in terms of goal building and confidence building are all part of your achievements, right? Set yourself some daring goals. Now, what are your goals as an author? We live in a world that everything is measured by sales and followers, and there's always something. There's always a measurement, but you don't have to necessarily have a marker of X number of sales. If X number of sales, if it's increasing your sales by whatever number it is, that's great. But it could literally be deciding that from here on out, you're going to create a series of assets that promotes your stories, that promotes your books, that promotes your content online. It could also mean that, okay, in the next few months, you're going to create your own series of reading events. So perhaps partnering with your local libraries, or partnering with schools, or partnering with an organization whereby you can give little sessions and talks about the work that you've done. Whatever it is, whatever space, figure out a goal that suits you. But try and dare yourself step by step to get bigger and bigger and bigger when it comes to your goals, right? And I know fundamentally and ultimately it's about making money or sales. It's up to you. That's the ultimate goal for some authors, right? Or probably a lot of authors. But for you, you decide what your goals are initially and then work your way up from there. Speak up. Now, wherever space you find yourself in, whether it's a virtual event like this where you ask a question, whether I've given you an example of organizing your own readings, your own events like this, actually, where you can read sections from your book or invite other members of your network in terms of a virtual literary event, anything that you decide to do, but in terms of building your confidence, where you know that you could improve when it comes to putting yourself out there, speak up. And social media, again, is another way of speaking up. But social media is not just Twitter. Social media is not just Instagram. Social media could literally be filming a series of videos. If you're a children's author, you could decide after this session that you want to film a series of videos reading your books, for example, or reading books of other members, for example, and a nice short series of 10. That's a way of speaking up. And what I want you to do is, if you're somebody who resists, somebody who's not confident at doing things like that, or filming yourself, or seeing yourself in front of a camera, give it your best shot. Give it even one video on your Instagram page, one video that you upload onto your YouTube channel. If you don't have a YouTube channel, consider creating one. If you don't have a YouTube channel, you don't have to. You can actually use your Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook page, but speak up in these spaces. You can also utilize platforms like podcasts. If you don't want to start your own podcast, there's so many podcasts out there, but speak up, use your voice, do a little bit of research and use your voice. And this is what I was speaking about earlier in terms of being brave, right? So it's easier said than done, but you've got to start doing some research, find out which podcast you'd like to hear yourself on. And none of us actually likes to hear the sounds of our own voice. Only a few people, I won't name any names, I'm going to be very diplomatic, but only a few people like to hear the sound of their own voice. So make sure that you do some research and look for some podcasts. You don't have to start your own in order for you to speak up on different platforms. And do something different. What can you, as an author, do that's different than anybody else? You already are a unique individual, right? I've mentioned that earlier in terms of finding your uniqueness in this space, in the literary space. Identify what makes you unique and do something different. Do something a little bit bold. There are so many creative ideas. I'm not going to give you any of them for free anymore. There's lots of ideas. We can talk for hours about the kinds of ideas, but do a brain dump, a brainstorm. I keep calling it a brain dump, but it's a brainstorm, right? A brainstorm of the kinds of ideas that you can do that will build your confidence. Again, it could literally just mean you connecting with a few members in this group, in the society, and creating an accountability network where you kind of dare each other, challenge each other every week to do something different. And if you've got your accountability partners as other authors, it makes it so much easier, because you know by the end of that week, you have to do the thing that you said you're going to do to the people in your network. So hopefully that makes sense. And those are ways in which you can build confidence. And all of these are the kinds of things that make it so much easier for you to network in different spaces. So I wanted us to look at how we've got our confidence now. Well, hopefully we're working on our confidence. It takes a lot of work. It's a daily mission. Now I want us to look a little bit more about telling our story. So tell your story as an individual, as an author, as a writer, as a creative. During this period of I was going to say uncertainty again. I think we've heard that word so many times. I feel like I need some new words for uncertainty or unprecedented times. During this period, though, of time, I have really come to rely and really see the value more and more of creatives like yourselves, authors, writers, thinkers, doers. And I would love, what I love to do is dig deeper. I do a deep dive on the people who I admire, the people whose books I read or programs I watch. So really take the time to think about how you tell your story. Look at what makes you unique as an individual. Why do you write? Again, that's going to build your confidence. Go back to the why. Who are you writing for? Why are you writing? What is the legacy you want to leave behind when it comes to the work that you're creating now? Because now, as we're all at home or working from home, the majority of us, it's an opportunity to really think about how our story leaves an makes an impact on the world. Use digital spaces. Again, we're going to talk about that later. Challenge the status quo. Now, the status quo to me is the structure of, uniformity the society continues to uphold. That normal way of life that society, or I should say, certain facets of the media say we're going to go back to, or perhaps this is our new normal. What I want to challenge all of you to do is to consider how you're challenging the status quo. Are you a progressive? Are you disrupting spaces? Your story might sound completely, normal to you, but it's going to sound different to me, right? And there's so many people who can't wait to hear your story and hear from you. So really think about what your story is. Look back at what I've said earlier in terms of, let me think about confidence building. So let's talk about knowing yourself and knowing your value. A lot of us, what we do when I answer that question in terms of, who are you? Are you progressive? We're always going to go back to, we're boring, we're normal. But if I challenge you to take a moment to write a few bullet points about, what it is about you that not only stands out, but that inspires you, motivates you to write and to create the content that you created in this world, I'm sure your story is amazing and incredible, right? So really think about your story. And again, this is another thing I'd like you to do. So literally, at the end of this session or at some point this week, between 5 and 10 bullet points, so just succinctly highlight your story and highlight the things that make you stand out. And also goes back to your why, goes back to your purpose and your values, right? Beyond just being an author who wants to sell a lot of books and become rich. Actually consider what your value is in this space and what your story is. And when you started to undertake a task like that, it builds your confidence and it enables you to network in spaces more confidently. And it enables you to highlight, those elements and parts of yourself that are not just about being an author. It's about who you are as an individual, right? So think about next, when you're telling your story, who your audience is. So if we're telling our story as an author, so if I'm going to give you some examples, we're going to talk about personal brands and other authors, mainstream and perhaps not so mainstream authors. Think about your audience, who you're telling these stories to, right? There's different facets to this. And I want to break it down in terms of who we're speaking to, who we're networking with, okay? So we obviously our initial audiences are our readers, the people who are reading and are buying our books, borrowing our books from local libraries, okay? Or book swaps and book clubs, our readers. So what is it about our story that will engage with the reader? For some authors, they want to be behind the scenes and their readers just want to read their books. But for other authors, the readers actually feed into the author themselves, and that's part of the journey. It's like I said earlier, I like to find out about the creator, not just the thing they've created, right? So really think about you as a creator and think about your reader and think about what else you're giving them. And we'll talk about how much of yourself to give them, because I want to make sure we're creating safe spaces when we're navigating these networking spaces. You're also going to be networking with other authors and speaking to other authors. So really think about, when you're telling your story, who else is in your network? Who else are you engaging with? Okay? The publishing industry. So there's lots of conversations, especially now, in the midst of conversations around social mobility, class, diversity, inclusion, racial diversity. There's so much conversation in the publishing sector and publishing industry about all of these. Well, I hope there's conversation, because we know that there needs to be a challenge to that status quo that I mentioned earlier. So really think about, where do you slot in, right? Where do you slot in? What could you do as an author when you're navigating and speaking at events, virtual events for the moment, when you're interacting with others on social media? How can you use your story and your voice to make an impact in the publishing industry? You might decide, you're not radical. You're not the kind of person who wants to challenge anything, but it's something to consider. You can literally just amplify if that's where you feel safe, because you recognize whatever privilege you might have. But consider the fact that your story, your position within the industry that you find yourself in can actually be something quite exciting and can be a disruptor and can enable you to make a change, even if it's a small change. And finally, when we talk about sharing our story and networking media and the press, now it depends on obviously the kinds of books you're writing and the kinds of content you're putting out there. But the media and the press are always going to be at the behind the scenes, whatever it is you're doing, especially kind of going back to that word of sales. If you're trying to sell more of your books, you can take ownership of this. You don't have to wait for a separate publicist from your publishing company. You don't have to hire an individual like me. You can take ownership of how you engage with the media and the press, how you network with journalists, how you engage with journalists on social media. So really think about, when you're telling your story, how can your story tap into the media and the press, even at periods of time like this? There are lots of topics going on at the moment where you might find that actually you can add some value there. Okay, so these are just a few of the key audiences when we're talking about who we're telling our story to, how we slot in and navigate and network where we'll find ourselves. And hopefully that makes sense. So we've spoken about those spaces, who our audiences are, who we'll be networking with, who we'll be speaking to, who we'll be engaging with, and who obviously will engage. Now we've got to really look at how we build these relationships, and we're trying to build relationships that last. Now, this again is going to be something that not all of you are going to want to do. It's about being a little bit courageous at times, but you really have to take it into consideration that in order to achieve some of the goals that we've spoken about earlier in terms of building our confidence, telling our story, we have to be open to these points that I've listed here. And they are kind of different ways of saying the same thing, right? Be open and available. It's similar just to be visible, okay? Although actually, you can be visible but not open and available. So that's a correction on my part. Be open and available, right? Now, in the spaces that I've spoken about earlier, it really does depend on who you're telling your story to and your why. But I think it's really important. So, for example, if you're an author who is passionate about young people's books, children's books, and social mobility, for example, you may want to network and navigate in spaces where you not only tell your story and sell your books or promote your books, but you also speak about the issues of social mobility for children in this country. Be visible. And I think the one thing people forget when it comes to visibility and relationship building is, the more actively you are on whatever space, whether it's, offline in rooms that hopefully eventually we'll be able to get back into, or online, your visibility is a great way of maintaining relationships. Okay, so I'm going to use some examples of how you can use digital spaces to maintain your visibility. But the fact that you're visible is a really good way of maintaining and building relationships. Be generous with your space. Be responsive to comments, be engaged with your audiences. It's really important to obviously have boundaries, but I think if you're generous with conversations, be open with conversations, it's a great way of building relationships. Be receptive. Now, being receptive doesn't mean that you have to be overwhelmed and bombarded, but being receptive means you are able to have conversations in all of the spaces that I mentioned before and build relationships based on mutual respect, okay? So be receptive to new ideas and new kinds of conversations, especially when it comes to networking. But fundamentally, and this is really important, and I'm going to touch on why slightly later, is maintaining boundaries. Now, depending on which space you're navigating in, if, for example, let me focus on consumer-led spaces, so the readers. Now, if you, for example, become very famous, there are people who are going to suddenly feel like they need more of you. You have to maintain some kind of boundary. Give them what you feel comfortable giving them through telling your story, obviously through putting out your books and your content, but maintain clear boundaries. It gets hard with social media now. It gets hard with the digital and online space and online world to have these kind of boundaries, because people will always look. And again, I don't want to look for things. I don't want to scare you, but you have to find a way of maintaining boundaries. Once you've done that and you decide what those boundaries are, for example, give you a really quick example, you may decide you're not going to share any elements of your personal life on social media. That's something I don't do. I don't share my personal life on social media, because I feel like it's really important to have that boundary. I have my offline life. I'm still who I am online, but I don't think the world needs to know everything about my personal relationships. And that's one thing that I do. So you have to decide what you like to do for yourself in these spaces. But it's still a great way, once you've got healthy boundaries, great way to build relationships. Every healthy relationship with anybody, any organization, any network is based on boundary building. So hopefully I'm still making sense and I've still got you and you've not fallen asleep. Our next set of slides are going to focus a little bit more about you as the individuals. So we already know your stories. What I want you to do now is really focus on your personal brand. How do you focus on your personal brand and utilize that to harness positive, sometimes you'll get negative, but overall positive relationships, and build a positive perception of yourself as an author in literary spaces, right? Now, when you develop a personal brand and you get an understanding of yourself and your personal brand, who you are, it makes it easier to take ownership of your narrative, okay? Now, I don't want this to become too formal. I am not saying create this strategy and structure behind you, like X, Y, Z. What I am saying is understand yourself and understand how you want to be perceived. By perception, I really do want you to focus on fact as opposed to creating a whole new narrative and story about yourself. So how do you want to be perceived? What do you want to be known? Go back to that question I asked earlier. What do you want to be known for? So how do you want people to see you in this literary space? How do you want to navigate these spaces? So what do you want to be known for, right? This is what personal branding is. It isn't necessarily creating a persona. It might be, and a little industry, be careful, industry secret. Sometimes, obviously, in media spaces, people create personas to push product, to sell, right? I'm not necessarily saying you should do that. What I am saying is know yourself, maintain and build your identity, okay? And that's where the confidence building comes on. Once you know yourself, this is easy. You already are your personal brand, right? But if you don't know yourself, or you're a little bit uncomfortable, or you're not confident, then that's where the difficulty starts to arise, right? So make sure you get to know yourself and work on how you think you see yourself, and also take the time to consider how others see you. That doesn't mean you have to be controlled by their perceptions of you, but it is an important activity to just undertake in terms of perception. And one fun activity, is it fun? I don't know if it's fun, is if you ask your immediate circle, so again, going back to accountability partners, how do they perceive you? Especially since we're going to be talking about digital spaces, how do they perceive you on social media? And ask them for 3 words that describe your social media personal brand, your social media brand. How do they perceive you? So I'm going to use some good examples here. Hopefully they're good examples. 1 or 2 who might not be. 1, I'm just joking. So we've got 4 fantastic authors, highly successful authors here. Bernardina Evaristo, Dorothy Coomson, Alexander McCall Smith, and obviously we know who this lady is, J.K. Rowling. Now, if we look at them, and we look at them as individuals, right, we see that they've all got personal brands or perceptions. It's always we perceive them, not only from their social media activity. This is one person in particular, very active on social media, but also just in general, how they want to be perceived, how they want to engage with their audiences, right? So I've used a couple of words, and we can just, you can just think of some yourself, but take the time to consider how each of these individuals have navigated the literary space, and navigated the literary space based on how we perceive them, their books, the content they put out, and their audiences. Remember what I mentioned earlier in terms of the different audiences, right? So with Miss Bernadine, obviously winning an amazing award recently. She's been an author for many years, but winning that prize, winning that award has really done wonders for her visibility, right? And so while some would argue, even though she wasn't necessarily invisible, some would say that she was invisible to an extent. Now she's at the forefront because of the award that she won, and also because of the intense mainstream media, and she's won another award recently, hasn't she? Intense mainstream media coverage, right? A couple of things to learn from Miss Bernadine is the sense of obviously doing the work, many books. She's been a writer for a very long time. The award. Now, for you, if you as an individual author who may not have a huge agent or a huge publishing company backing you, consider what you can do intentionally to put yourself in similar situations and scenarios. So what awards can you put yourself up for, and how can you amplify those awards if it is the case that you would like to get more spotlighting on your work and on yourself, and how comfortable you are doing that, and how comfortable you are navigating those spaces. And it comes with pros and cons, and unfortunately we haven't got the time to kind of go with the pros and cons, but in this instance it was overall, I think, positive. With Miss Dorothy Coomson, amazing writer, a consistent, persistent best-selling author. And she knows her audience. She's quite accessible in the sense of on social media, she's very engaged. She may not have the biggest following on social media, but she's plugged in. And we get the sense that she uses it herself, that she doesn't assign it to a separate social media manager. So it makes us feel as readers, or for me, who was a reader of her books, like she's accessible. But obviously I know her boundaries. I'm not going to now, ask her too many personal questions. I feel like she gives me enough great books, and once in a while a nice comment on an Instagram post. That's enough. And she comes across as authentic, right? There's an authenticity there with Dorothy. Alexander, I think for him, his series of books, as we know, with the detective series of books, long-standing. Now, in terms of visibility, I think if you know the books, you know the books. He knows his audience. There's an authenticity there. There's a quirkiness there. There's I don't know necessarily if there's an accessibility there. And the visibility is only as much as I think he's willing to give. I don't think he necessarily needs to give more than he has. Perhaps in the past he's given more, but honestly, his books are pretty much his brand, if that makes sense. And because they are so popular, they even had a TV show at one point. But because of that popularity, he didn't necessarily need to put himself in the forefront. And actually, that's fine. I think the stories he tells through his books are enough. And if, I wanted to find out a little bit more about his life or his inspiration, I can do a little bit of research. But he's not a celebrity author. And moving on to J.K. Rowling, who is a celebrity author. And with that celebrity comes some risks and rewards, right? She's very active on social media. Again, some risks and rewards. And, I'm not going to comment too much further on, the good and the bad there. Be careful. She might be on this call. I don't know. And if so, hi. But to be honest, you have to decide how far you want to go when it comes to controversy, right? Controversial topics. For a lot of her fans and people who've read her books, they just want the books and to just engage in good news stories surrounding the work she does. Her opinions and the things that she says and shares on social media perhaps boost her public profile, and they are part of her personal brand. But she can stick by that. And this is the question I want to ask you in terms of where are you? What's your limit, basically? Where are you willing to go? And I'm not saying she's doing this intentionally necessarily to sell more books. She's one of the best-selling authors in the world. But in terms of visibility, she doesn't have to be as active on social media as she is. And we get the sense that it's her obviously using social media. So you've got to think about when you're using these platforms and using social media, how far are you willing to go? And in our first slide earlier, I talked about being brave. That in and of itself is something you have to consider. If you have an opinion in this world, I don't think there's anything wrong with having opinions. Obviously, we can't all agree on things. Are you willing to share it? And have you done your your risk and reward analysis. That's a PR terminology. Look at it and just think for a moment. Sometimes we're human. Again, this is why in the PR industry we get a lot of PR disasters, because people sometimes they're too human and they make mistakes. You might make a mistake, but really think about how you're using certain platforms to share your opinions based on your values and your personal brand and your why. Okay, I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't, but think about it and look at each of these individuals and how each of these have navigated both traditional, so some of them are just traditional, and modern spaces and digital spaces, and how it not only amplifies their work, engages with their communities, their audiences, but navigates through the literary space and engages with fellow authors and people in the industry. So really ask yourselves a couple of these questions when you're thinking about personal branding, and you think about some of the examples I've given you earlier. Does your personal brand open you up for opportunities to grow? Really look at, okay, once you've identified who you are, how you're perceived, is this opening up new opportunities for you, right? So I want to give a really good example in terms of, if, for example, you do the challenge I set you, where you've got your accountability networks. This actually means networking with other members, right? And other members or people in your network say they perceive you as being shy or quiet. And actually you feel like, no, you've got something in you to share. What work do you need to do to change that perception and to make sure that you are a little bit more vocal and work on that shyness, whatever it might be? Are you able to confidently navigate through your literary career ladder? So we're calling, your industry. There's going to be times where there's a lot of things you have to do. There's a lot of events you'll have to attend, whether they're online or offline, readings, interviews you'll have to give. Are you confidently navigating through these spaces? And is your personal brand holding you back or putting you forward for these opportunities? Are you seen as an expert in whatever space? Now, when I talk about expertise, I'm not saying being stuck or rigid. And again, it depends on what books you're writing. With the authors that I shared in the previous slide, we could go back. One could argue that they're known for different styles of writing. For you, are you seen as somebody who's known for that kind of style of writing, or a genre it is that you write in? Okay, are you seen as a team player? Now, when I put this in, it kind of seems a bit like corporate jargon, but when it comes to being a team player, I keep referencing you networking with other members in the society. And I also want you to consider how you network within the publishing industry, right? I've mentioned this before. Think about, beyond thinking about yourself as an individual, look at what legacy you're leaving and what your voice adds to the space of the literary world, right? Be a team player in the literary world. Network in this space, but also engage, listen, be willing to receive, new perspectives and new ideas. And are you building these strong relationships across the board? Are you building them with not just within your networks, but is this actually flowing out into your everyday life? Okay, I know once you've got a goal when it comes to being an author, sometimes you become focused on this set goal. But remember that the best way of enhancing and building relationships, and the best way of maintaining your personal brand and enhancing your personal brand, is ensuring that you have these strong relationships across a multiple of networks. A few minutes left. Good. We're on to our social media. We're almost done. So how are we using social media to promote and publicize our work and build relationships? Now, social media is a bit of it's a contentious one, because I love it, but I know not everybody does. There's scary spaces, but there are some really valuable spaces. I'm going to use some examples of some of the spaces that I really would love for you to start to engage with. You should already have, as an author, your own blog space. People forget that blogs were old school means of social media, because people can leave comments and engage on blogs, right? So if you're an author with your own website, and I'm assuming that, a handful, most of you do, I don't make up assumption, but most of you have your own website. If you don't, if you only have a blog, use your blog space. I think it's important to try and figure out how you can use your blog space to share, update, and engage your audience. Facebook is one of those spaces that it's dipping in popularity, and for good reason. I think there's some ethical issues going on there. I mean, most platforms now have some kind of ethical issues. That's unfortunately that's capitalism, that's a society we live in. But Facebook has some particularly ethical issues at the moment, but it's still a popular platform. And if you do choose to continue using Facebook, you can, you've got a captive audience. Use it regularly. Don't use, now let me just be clear, this is not about using Facebook as, adding friends. This is about creating a fan page, even a group page when you engage with Facebook, using group pages to network. Create your own fan page. So this is a good exercise for anybody who's feeling like, you don't want to put too much attention on yourself or your personal brand. A really good exercise, if you're an author, especially if you don't have your own website, create a Facebook fan page, right? Good for creating boundaries too, where you can share regular updates. It's a formalized page. Share regular updates. People have to like your page to get those updates. They're not adding you as a friend, so that already removes that language of friendship, and that boundary is kind of cut out. So start using, if you're going to use Facebook, we'll continue to use it. And if you do use it, do an audit and assess how you're using it at the moment. Twitter, love Twitter. If anybody follows me, I'm quite active on Twitter. It's what I have no shame in that, but it's one of those spaces. And one of the authors that I used as an example in the previous slide in terms of personal branding, it uses that quite a lot. So Twitter can be a great platform for amplifying your work and networking. So if you're using Twitter, you've got to be quite engaged on it. Use it in a way that makes you feel comfortable, right? Use it authentically. The best way of using Twitter is not trying to copy anybody else. Use Twitter authentically. Use Twitter. You can have fun on Twitter. You can sell on Twitter. You can promote. You can engage. You can network. But also you have to pay attention. And if you are going to share your opinion, because we all have the right to our own opinion, make sure you're ready for the consequences. And I use that word because Twitter is one of those spaces where if you tweet something that the masses don't like, you will hear about it. LinkedIn, another great platform. I like LinkedIn, formal platform. Not too, it's a professional version for me as Facebook. You can post regularly there. Instagram, great visual platform. And one thing I'd like you to really consider, the list I'm sharing right now, is how can you use one or two of these platforms? If you already have them, undertake an audit. If you have to deactivate one, deactivate one. But decide on one or two of these and really start to use them regularly. You can post videos on Instagram. You can post visual, obviously, images of yourself on Instagram. So you really consider how you're using Instagram. If you're not using Instagram, have a look. I'm not saying sign up to Instagram now. Don't sign up to platforms and then stop using them. Start to just have a look. Look and decide what suits you. Goes back to who you are. What's your personality like, right? If your personality is somebody who's a bit chatty, but like me, you'll like Twitter. If you're a bit nosy, you'll like Facebook. If you like the formal approach, also like me, you'll like LinkedIn. If you like to look at pictures and share pictures, Instagram. Same with Pinterest. Pinterest is another great tool where you can share and amplify your work. Great for authors. I think not enough authors recognize the power of Pinterest. There's lots of resources online in which you can find out how you can use Pinterest to amplify your books and amplify personal brand. Snapchat, slightly younger audience, as well as TikTok, which I left off. You can utilize that. Brands utilize Snapchat and TikTok to engage with a younger audience. So consider that. And also remember, before I go on to the next slide, really think about, this is not just about you, your comfort zone. When we're looking at networking, we've done the confidence building, we've looked at our goals, we've started to work on our personal brand. But remember what I said earlier in terms of audiences. This is not just about using the social media platform just for yourself. Think about who you're talking to. So if you've got books which are YA or for young people, you might consider Snapchat, TikTok being the platforms that you might want to kind of talk about the work that you want to take. Or if you want to become a virtual mentor, for example, these are the spaces that you can use to engage with people so you can be a virtual mentor in the literary space. And mentoring is another kind of means of networking as well. And finally, YouTube. But again, this list is a longer list than this, but YouTube is another great example. I'd love to see more authors creating their own videos, reading their books, video series of book reviews. There's a great movement on YouTube of book reviews. You can tap into that as well. Who reviews books? If you still don't have the confidence to film yourself and watch yourself back, consider sending a couple of copies, freebies, to people who do that at the moment. Book reviewers on YouTube, and you can share the links on your social media. So you can make sure you can cross section. You can undertake overlap. That's what I'm looking for. A lot of overlap using social media. So we're almost done. So common social media concerns. When we're networking, we become obsessed with follower count. People become attached and obsessed with follower count. When you're on social media, whether you're starting or you're already on there, don't concentrate too much on how many followers you have. It's all about the engagement. It's all about the conversations. You're more than a number. You're more than a number. You are a person. Remember, we're talking about your personal brand. We're talking about relationships. Your use of social media should be about relationship building, not just about how many followers you have. Trolling is obviously a serious issue. My quick thing is block, mute, report on any platform. You're getting trolled or harassed on social media, block, mute, report. Posting the wrong things. Now, posting the wrong things could be literally anything that just doesn't make any sense. Really think about what you're posting at the time, appropriateness of all the things you're posting. Not posting enough. Not sure why that's not a capital N, but anyway, not posting enough. So if you, it's like what I said earlier. Look, if you're going to set up a social media account, make sure you're consistent. Don't just set something up and then 2 months later I go back and check and there's nothing on there. There's nothing on there. It's like tumbleweed. Make sure you post consistently, and that's why I say you don't have to be on everything. Decide which one or two platforms that you can be on and post consistently. There are tools as well you can use that will enable you to automate your social media activity. And there are people you can hire if you have the budget. But for now, what I'd like you to do is to engage with your community. So another thing that happens when you're networking online is you're not engaging with people. Gosh, that's an awful typo. Sorry. You're not engaging with people. Engage with people in your community, okay? Make sure that you're having conversations with people, and not just the people that you're comfortable with. Be brave. That was the 2 words I used earlier. Start to have conversations with different kinds of people. Have conversations with different authors. Have conversations with your readers. Your readers are waiting to hear from you. So have conversations with your readers on social media. But caveat, don't spend all day on social media just talking. You also have a life outside of social media. And don't become too attached to a set group. And that's literally what I just said. Don't just stay stuck. Network outside of your comfort zone, but don't spend too much time on social media. Otherwise, you're going to end up being stuck on there. Few more points before we wrap up. Social media networking, read the room, social awareness and sensitivity. We don't want to get into too many controversial points unless you're ready to have those controversial conversations. Build your tribe. So engage and interact. And I've been saying this throughout this session. Engage, interact with people who from a broad spectrum and who challenge your awareness. Find common ground as well. Look for shared interests when you're first starting off on social media, and keep conversation light. Build, some interesting content that's relevant to yourself and relevant to whatever it is you're writing about, and whatever the books are, the content you're creating. So be creative on social media. You don't have to do what everybody else is doing. I've said this already, and I keep going back to this because it's really, really important. Mindfulness, mindful use of social media is really important. And that's it. just a few minutes over. I'd love to hear some questions. Thank you so much. It was a great session. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ronke. That was fantastic. There's quite a few questions that have come in. I will just skim through. You just bear with me a second.
Okay. That was good. It's funny when I'm talking to all you authors, I'm like, oh my God, I just noticed my typo. I'm so sorry. It's like, oh no, a typo. But that was
How much publicity can we expect our publisher to do?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And this is the thing, as you know, I'm sure as authors, it depends on the size and scope of your publisher. I would always say, and I advise this, is try and do some yourself. Now, have a conversation with your publishing company and their in-house PR. But I would say take ownership of and this is the point of this conversation, right? Taking ownership of your brand. So do some of the work yourself, and that's where, you know, amplifying on social media helps. Your publishing company should be doing the work, but because they're representing a lot of other individuals, you shouldn't rely on just them. You should do the work yourself as well. And it helps, you know, once whatever it is you put out there, it helps if you've already got that social media presence to amplify your work. But a good publishing company should already have some either in-house agents, in-house PR, or they've got a good partnership with a good PR agency. But again, you have to keep your eyes on the prize. So make sure that you hold them accountable. And if you're not happy, you do some of the work yourself.
Thank you. Richard Clark asked, how much time do you think authors should be putting into social media and online networking each day?
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to our goals. You've got to decide, sit down and figure out, okay, what is your goal? Is it that you're trying to sell books? Is it that you're trying to raise awareness just of yourself as an author? If it's the case that you need to raise awareness of both of those two, you need a bit of time. So I would say, you know, how long is a piece of string? I'd say at least dedicate half an hour to an hour every day. Sounds like a lot, but it actually means just compartmentalizing, and it depends on how many platforms you're on. So if you're on Twitter and LinkedIn, for example, half an hour each a day, and then as you're making supper or as you're watching TV, you can just scroll through easily. But you should dedicate some time and build a habit. So by the time you've built that habit, it becomes easy to detach. So we want to make sure we build that habit, and then you can detach and dip back in and out. But yeah, it depends on your goals. It really does. It's how long is a piece of string kind of question. It's a difficult one.
Thank you. So Ben Franken Davis says, what kind of stuff should we be posting about? He doesn't feel like he's got anything interesting to say. So have you got any tips? If you're
it goes back to, I think I asked a few questions in terms of, you know, ask yourselves who you are. What's your story? What are your interests? What are you interested in? What do you write about? You know, there's so much scope for conversation building online now, more than ever before. There's, you know, the gatekeepers still exist, but you can also create your own tribe. So what are your interests? You know, really think about that. And also, you don't have to, and I say this as well, you don't have to be stuck on just what you write about. It could be that I'll use a really easy example. You're a children's author, but you're passionate about social mobility. You're passionate about, you know, class in this country, child food poverty, for example. You might want to amplify that on your timeline. You might want to talk about why it matters. You might want to talk about why libraries are important, or the themes that you touch upon in your book. There are themes in your books that you can start to draw out and point back to on social media. I mean, and this is why I said earlier, kind of do a brainstorm. There's so much about you that you might think is boring, but I might find fascinating. And that's why I think when we talk about networking, identify individuals within this society, within the society of authors, who can you connect with, who can become your accountability buddies, and then they can say, look, you're good at this is what you should be talking about on social media more often.
Thank you. Pauline O'Connor has asked, should we allow people to comment on our blog pages, or is that an invitation to trolls? And thank you, great session, Ronke.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and this is why I mentioned that blogs were the original social media platforms because of the comments, and it's inadvertently turned into, the comments have gone to Twitter now, because Twitter is a micro-blogging platform. You know, I personally think it's fine. I think what you can set it up to, there's functions that you can review before they go live, right? So set up the functions where you review them before they go live. You know, we're in a world now that even if they don't find you in your blog, I don't want to scare anybody, they'll find you somewhere if they want to troll you. Now, I'm not, you know, it's not a good thing, but people will find a way if they have a question about your content or your books. So I think leaving the content open is a good thing, but make sure that you set it up so that they don't go live. You can review, delete if it is really negative, and then, you know, publish it when it's something you're happy with. But I'm not, you know, that's a bit of a fine line when it comes to censorship, right? So I think it's important to recognize that you'll probably get negative feedback or something about something you put out there. There's a difference between negative feedback and trolling, intentional, someone just trying to be mean. People having negative feedback on something, that's normal. That's just the world we're in. But if someone's trolling you because they're just trying to be mean, then yeah, you have every right to shut off your comments and just lock it off.
Thank you. If a budding author, are you more likely to attract a potential publisher if you have a strong personal brand, online presence? If so, should you start building this before you even publish?
Yeah, this is a great question because it's a really fascinating one and something I've been observing over the years. I've also noticed that not only authors, even journalists are starting to become more active on social media and building their personal brand because it translates to other opportunities. So if you start to notice some of your favorite journalists, you'll see that they're becoming more active on social media because it means it opens them up to other way, books, for example, book deals. I won't say that having a huge following is the be all and end all. And I said it in one of my slides, that's not, follower count is not the only thing. But again, some publishers, and this is where we need to challenge some publishers are looking for quick wins. That's not necessarily a good thing. And this is where we've got to make sure we challenge that status quo. I think it's important to, not be obsessed with follower count and actually make sure that it doesn't become another barrier to entry. So I will definitely say, look, if the work is good, the work is good. It helps when it comes to selling your book, obviously, and engaging with readers. But I really want us to make sure that we hold publishing companies to account because it's a good excuse for them to just, focus on certain types of talent. You know what I mean? The big, the people, the big influencers or the biggest followers are the only ones who are going to get book deals if that's the case. So it only helps if it comes to a measurement of how many books we can sell, but it's only part of the puzzle and it's not the only piece. Definitely not the only piece.
Thank you. Eve Anderson says, where could I find a guide to Twitter for novices? I think this is where you come in, isn't it?
There's a few online resources. I think I've got an e-guide that might give us, I think I'll share the link to the e-guide, maybe I'll include it. There's a few online resources. I think I made a video on it. It's a tough one. One thing I will say is you've got to kind of, it's like swimming, just dive in. Obviously, I don't want you to drown, obviously, but dive into Twitter, observe for a while and take it step by step. It can be very overwhelming, but once you build a habit and you build your online tribe, it makes it so much easier. And when you follow some of the rules that I've kind of mentioned, like when you become uncomfortable, when you're realizing it's too much, log off, switch off, when you're getting, unfortunately, if you ever get trolled, block, mute. But yeah, there's some online resources that I can send to the society that they can share in terms of using social media effectively.
And this is the final question, I think, from Tom Williams. Finding your readers on Twitter is not that straightforward. Any suggestions?
No. They find you, and that's the point. This is why I was saying earlier is your audience. So you have to know your audience. You have to be visible. They will find you. It's not a case of you finding them. So if you're putting out the content that reflects your values, reflects the content that you've got in your book, the themes and topics around your book and your personal brand, it makes it so much easier for your readers to find you. If you do it the other way around and try and identify, so you're really, okay, so for example, I'm going to use a very example of YA, so young people's books, right? No, what's the kind of content they're into? What are the kind of things they read? What's the kind of thing that kind of sparks an interest? You have to make sure that the content you're putting out there resonates. It's not the same, it resonates with them, right? It's easy, accessible, one of the words I used earlier, and they will come to you. And if your book if you've got a decent quality book, they'll definitely find you and connect with you. But it comes down to consistency and accessibility and visibility on social media. If you're not visible on certain social media platforms, they're not going to find you.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to close with?
No, but hopefully if there's any more questions, they can send them across and we'll be sharing the slide deck. But just dive in, get networking, be braver with your personal brand. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me for this session.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who watched. Thank you, Ronke. That was very informative and engaging with lots of takeaways for us all to implement. A few of you have asked, and I can confirm that we will definitely be sharing Ronke's slides after the session by email, and any other PDFs that she wants to share with you also. And to remind you, all the sessions are free, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis, there is a link at the top of the chat. The festival continues tomorrow with our Theatre in Crisis panel discussion at 3 p.m. And I'll be also hosting afternoon tea with Eric Gregory Judge and travelling scholarship recipient Inua Alams. And head to societyofauthors.org/events to book. All events are free. Let's continue this conversation on Twitter. The festival hashtag is SOA at Home. And if you've missed any of our SOA at Home festival events, please do check our Vimeo or our YouTube accounts to catch up. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in.